Autumn rain whispered over the stone steps of Firestone Library. It was almost midnight. The campus had fallen silent except for the soft sound of a mop sliding over marble floors. Maria Alvarez, 22, had begun her first week as a night cleaner. Her uniform was too large, her hands raw from detergent, and her English still shy and halting. She remembered what her mother said before she left Texas. "Keep your head down, mija. Work hard. Be invisible." Inside Firestone, invisibility came easily. The library at night looked like a cathedral built for silence. Light from brass lamps bathed the reading halls in gold. Shadows of old books stretched across the walls like sleeping giants. Maria often paused to look at the math journals. Though she didn't understand the symbols, she sensed their quiet gravity, the way a page filled with equations could feel like a prayer. That night, while cleaning the third floor, the mathematics archives, she reached to dust a high shelf. The cloth slipped from her hand, brushing a stack of yellowed papers. They slid to the floor with a soft sigh. When she bent down, she noticed something strange. One of the pages had 2 publication dates. Faintly printed beneath the title, Hilbert's Problems, was the year 1931, but typed over it in a newer font, 1933. Maria frowned. The paper smelled of age and ink. She wiped the corner gently and saw a faint signature at the bottom, E.M. The rest blotted out by dark ink. She hesitated, then folded the page and slipped it into her apron. She would return it later, she told herself. Still, her pulse quickened. Something about that date felt wrong. She didn't know much about Hilbert or the famous 23 problems that had haunted mathematicians for decades, but she sensed that someone had tried to change more than a date. At 11 o'clock, the rain grew heavier. The wind moaned through the Gothic windows. Maria decided to finish quickly. When she passed the storage room marked Department of Mathematics, Restricted Access, she noticed the steel door wasn't fully latched. Curiosity tugged at her. She pushed the door open. The smell inside was different, older, denser. Stacks of boxes filled the narrow room, each labeled, "Do not circulate." On a table lay a bundle of notes bound by a faded ribbon. She touched it lightly. The ribbon crumbled into dust. The top sheet was covered in tight handwriting, symbols dancing across the page. Sons. Z-as. She could barely read them, yet something about the repetition of symbols felt deliberate, almost musical. At the bottom of one page was a line in pencil. Valid only if the Riemann hypothesis holds. Maria didn't know what that meant, but the tone of the words, hesitant, human, stirred something in her. Someone had written this by hand, not for fame, but to be understood. Then she turned the last page. There it was, a name written clearly, trembling slightly. Elias Monroe, 1930. She froze. She'd never seen the name before, but she could feel it. This was not a student's scribble. It was the voice of someone who once mattered and had been buried. Lightning flashed through the window. She flinched, clutching the notes to her chest. When she left the room, the hallway lights flickered. Somewhere behind her, a door creaked. A beam of flashlight swept across the corridor. A man's voice called out, low and firm. "Who's there?" Maria pressed herself against the wall. The light moved closer, then stopped at the locked door. The man muttered to himself, "They must never find out." The words chilled her blood. Back in her tiny dorm room, Maria sat by the window, rain tapping against the glass. She unfolded the page again. Elias Monroe. The name felt heavy on her tongue. Her father's voice came back to her, from long ago, before the accident on the construction site. "Math is the only language that can't lie, Hija." 1 plus 1 will always be 2, no matter who you are. She looked at the equations. They seemed to breathe in the lamplight, alive with meaning she could not yet read. Maria knew one thing. Someone had tried to erase this man from history. And for reasons she couldn't explain, she couldn't let that happen. The next evening, the head librarian stopped her near the entrance. "You were seen near the archives last night," the woman said sharply. "Those rooms are off limits." Maria apologized, eyes lowered. The woman leaned closer. "For your own good," she whispered. "Don't go back there. Some knowledge isn't meant to be touched." But that warning only deepened her resolve. The following night, Maria returned. This time she copied the equations by hand into her notebook. She didn't understand them yet, logarithms, zeta functions, density of primes, but she began to memorize their shapes, their rhythm. At the bottom of one sheet, a note caught her eye. If z's has no zeros outside re's, il 1/2, then the distribution of primes can be predicted precisely by the logarithmic integral. She whispered the line aloud as if repeating a prayer. From somewhere deep in the building she heard the creak of footsteps again. She extinguished her lamp and held her breath. The same voice murmured, almost echoing from the walls. "No one must ever see those proofs." The lock clicked. Silence returned. Maria exhaled slowly. She gathered her notes, heart pounding. What was this proof? Who was Elias Monroe? And why had the dates been changed? She didn't yet know that this single night, a girl with a mop, a page on the floor, would unravel a secret guarded by generations. As the bells of Princeton Chapel struck midnight, Maria whispered to the darkness, "I'll find you, Elias, even if I have to sweep away every lie." The rain had passed, leaving the Princeton campus wrapped in a silver morning haze. From the dorm window, Maria watched the students rushing across the courtyard, clutching coffee cups, their laughter echoing against the old stone walls. She felt like a shadow among them, unseen, unheard. When her shift ended, she walked the edge of campus, following the narrow path behind the mathematics building. Every few yards, a bronze plaque marked the name of a man who had advanced the frontiers of knowledge, but none of them bore the name Elias Monroe. That afternoon, in the small break room reserved for custodians, Maria unfolded the page again. She traced the faded ink with her fingertip. "Monroe," she whispered. The name tasted both foreign and familiar. Her co-worker, an older janitor named Thomas Green, noticed her silence. "You all right, kid?" he asked. Maria hesitated. "Thomas, you've worked here long?" "Since Nixon," he chuckled. "Seen the library burn once, flood twice, and still smell of dust every spring." She smiled faintly. "Do you ever hear stories about someone named Elias Monroe? A mathematician?" Thomas's laughter faded. He leaned back in his chair. "Where'd you hear that name?" "An old paper, down in the archives." He studied her for a long moment, then lowered his voice. "Don't go asking that around here, Maria. Some names are better left buried." "Why?" Thomas sighed, eyes fixed on his coffee. "There used to be rumors, back in the 30s, about a black mathematician who worked here. A prodigy. People said he proved something big, something to do with prime numbers. Then one day he just vanished. No records, no obituary, nothing." Maria's heart pounded. "Do you believe it?" "I was born long after. But Princeton's good at forgetting people who don't fit the picture in the brochure." He stood, finished his coffee, and added quietly, "Be careful, kid. This place listens." That night, Maria returned to the library earlier than usual. Firestone's long corridors glowed with lamplight. The rain had left the air thick and electric. She unlocked her cart and began her routine, but every creak of the floorboards seemed to whisper. The sound wasn't just in her head. From deep within the walls, near the restricted archives, came a faint tapping, rhythmic, like chalk against a board. She froze. It stopped when she moved closer. Then, from the far end of the hall, a gust of wind swept through, rattling loose pages from a stack of journals. One slid to her feet. On its margin, a scribbled note read, "They won't remember us, but the numbers will." Her breath caught. The handwriting matched Monroe's. She followed the faint sound toward the wall, tracing her hand along the cold stone. At one spot, behind a tall shelf, she found a narrow seam. The stones had been replaced. Newer mortar, slightly off color. Someone had sealed something there. Maria's hands trembled. She tapped the wall gently, hollow. She fetched her cleaning cart and pulled out a small screwdriver she used for tightening mop handles. Working carefully, she loosened one brick. Behind it lay a metal tin, rusted and covered in dust. Inside were sheets of paper, edges brittle, the ink nearly faded, and between them, a photograph. A man in a dark suit standing beside a chalkboard filled with equations. His eyes were sharp, proud, and weary all at once. Beneath the photo, Elias Monroe, 1930. Maria pressed her fingers to her lips. He was real. Footsteps echoed. She quickly slid the papers into her apron and replaced the brick. Two men turned the corner. One of them the head librarian's assistant, the other, the same man whose voice she'd heard the night before. Tall, gray-suited, with eyes like steel. They stopped when they saw her. "Evening," the man said. "Working late again?" "Yes, sir," Maria replied softly. He smiled thinly. "Be sure to finish quickly. Some areas are being inspected tonight." She nodded. He lingered a moment, eyes narrowing toward the wall behind her, then walked on. Only when their footsteps faded did she let out her breath. Back in her dorm room, Maria laid the papers out carefully. The handwriting was hurried, desperate. Some pages were covered in dense formulas, sums, integrals, the Greek letter Zaz repeating endlessly. On one torn page, a note. "The proof is not mine to own. Truth has no color." Maria's throat tightened. She thought of Monroe's face in the photograph, proud, defiant, and heartbreakingly alone. She wondered what it cost him to write those words. Over the next few nights, she studied the documents in secret. She spent hours copying equations, comparing them with textbooks she borrowed from the shelves. One evening, she approached a graduate student shelving books. "Excuse me," she asked shyly, "what's the Riemann hypothesis?" The student looked surprised. "That's, well, one of the biggest unsolved problems in mathematics. It's about the distribution of prime numbers, how they appear along the number line. If someone ever proved it, it would change everything." "Change everything?" "Yes. It would rewrite large parts of number theory. Some say it would even affect cryptography, the way we keep secrets safe." Maria nodded slowly. Rewrite history. Keep secrets safe. The words struck deep. The more she learned, the more the story came alive. Monroe hadn't just been erased. He'd been silenced because his proof threatened the order that kept certain men powerful, certain names immortal. In one margin, he had written, "If the pattern of primes reveals order, then the universe is fair. But if it's fair, what need have they for kings of knowledge?" She stared at the line until her eyes blurred. By the end of the week, she knew she couldn't keep the papers hidden. She needed help. Thomas was the only person she trusted. That night, she met him behind the chapel, where the ivy grew thick along the walls. She handed him the photograph first. He whistled softly. Well, I'll be damned. He's real. He hid these papers in the library wall, Maria whispered. Someone tried to erase him. Thomas studied the handwriting. If this gets out, it'll shake the school, maybe even the whole math world. I just want the truth, Maria said. He nodded slowly. Then we'll need proof that these pages are authentic. There's an old professor, Dr. Nathaniel Reed, retired now. Used to teach number theory, lives a few miles off campus. If anyone remembers Monroe, it's him. Maria clutched the tin tighter. Will he help us? Thomas gave a tired smile. He's a stubborn man, but he hates lies more than dust. That night, as she walked back across the quiet campus, Maria passed the library again. The lamps glowed faintly behind the rain-streaked windows. For a moment, she thought she saw a shadow at the top floor, a man standing by the window, watching. When she blinked, he was gone. The wind carried a faint sound, like chalk striking slate, echoing from within the walls. And in it, she thought she heard a whisper. Remember me. Morning broke cold and clear over Princeton. The rain had washed the campus clean, leaving the air sharp with the scent of wet ivy and chalk dust. Maria walked the narrow path that wound past the chapel and out toward the quiet suburbs beyond Nassau Street. In her bag, wrapped in a piece of brown cloth, were the hidden papers. Monroe's handwriting, his equations, his voice from another century. Thomas had given her directions scribbled on a napkin. Dr. Nathaniel Reed, 47, Birch Lane. Retired professor, number theory. Every few steps, Maria hesitated. She was afraid, not only of being caught, but of what she might learn. If Monroe had truly existed, then Princeton had buried more than a man. It had buried truth. The house at Birch Lane was small and worn, half hidden behind oak trees that had seen more winters than she had years. When she knocked, it took nearly a minute for the door to open. An elderly man appeared, tall and thin, his eyes pale blue behind round spectacles. He studied her with curiosity. Yes? Dr. Reed? He nodded. I'm no longer Dr. anything, young lady, but yes, who's asking? My name's Maria Alvarez. I work at the Firestone Library. I found something that might belong to you, or at least to your time. He frowned. My time? She opened her bag carefully and laid the photograph on the doorstep. The face of Elias Monroe caught the morning light. Dr. Reed's breath caught. His hand trembled as he lifted the photo. Where did you get this? In a wall, Maria whispered. Inside the mathematics archives. He looked at her sharply. Do you know who he was? I'm starting to. Dr. Reed stepped aside. Come in. The interior of his home smelled faintly of paper and pipe smoke. Books covered every surface, stacked in uneven towers that looked ready to collapse. On one wall hung a framed letter signed by Albert Einstein. Maria sat gingerly on a worn armchair while Reed poured 2 cups of tea. He spoke without looking at her. Elias Monroe was the best mind of my generation, and the loneliest. I was his student once. Maria's eyes widened. You knew him? I did. 1930, the year I entered graduate school. Princeton had only just begun admitting black scholars to audit classes, never to teach. Elias wasn't even on payroll. They called him a temporary researcher, but he was the one guiding half the doctoral candidates. What happened to him? Reed sighed, staring into his cup. He proved something he shouldn't have. Maria leaned forward. The Riemann hypothesis? A slow smile crossed the old man's lips. You've been reading. Yes. Or part of it. He found a way to connect the zeros of the zeta function with the distribution of primes using an entirely new approach. Elegant. Dangerous. Dangerous? Reed nodded. Because if his work had been accepted, it would have made several senior professors obsolete. Men who built their reputations on partial solutions, including my advisor. They couldn't allow a poor black mathematician to outshine them. He rose and walked to a cabinet, pulling out a folder yellowed with age. Inside was a single typed letter. The header read, Department of Mathematics, Princeton University, 1931. Reed handed it to her. The letter was short. Effective immediately. Elias Monroe's research fellowship is terminated. All materials pertaining to his work are to be sealed pending review. He is barred from further access to university facilities. Signed, Harrison Wells, Chair of Mathematics. Maria's stomach turned. So they erased him. They erased everything, Reed said softly. His notes, his name, even the publication dates on old journals. I tried to speak up once. I was told to forget. He looked at the photograph again. And I did. Until now. For a long moment, the room was silent except for the ticking of an old clock. Then Mariah reached into her bag and pulled out the tin box. She unfolded one of Monroe's pages and laid it before him. Reed leaned close, his eyes narrowing as he read. His hands began to shake. These are his, he whispered. I'd recognize that handwriting anywhere. Look, here, the notation for z's, and his shorthand for the logarithmic integral. Only he wrote like this. Tears welled in his eyes. He wasn't wrong, Maria. I checked his logic decades ago, before they made me stop. The structure held. He was so close. Close to proving it? Reed nodded slowly. Closer than anyone alive. He sat back, breathing hard. There was a night in 1931. The faculty gathered to review his findings. I was there. Monroe stood in front of the blackboard, calm, proud. But before he could finish, Professor Wells interrupted, accused him of plagiarism. He said the ideas were borrowed from unpublished work. It was a lie. What did Monroe do? He didn't fight back. He just erased the board, piece by piece, and walked out. The next morning, he was gone. His apartment empty. Some said he'd gone north. Others said he drowned himself in the Delaware River. No one ever saw him again. Maria's throat tightened. And no one questioned it? Reed gave a bitter laugh. We were young, frightened, grateful just to stay. He looked at her, eyes suddenly fierce. But you found what they buried. Do you understand what that means? Maria shook her head. It means someone has to tell the truth. Reed smiled sadly. The truth doesn't survive by accident, child. It survives because someone decides to keep remembering. He handed her back the photograph. Keep it. If they knew you had this, they'd take it. Who? Reed hesitated. There's an old fraternity here. Faculty only. They called themselves the Ivory League. Started as a social club, became something darker. They controlled archives, publications, funding. If Monroe threatened their legacy, they would have destroyed every trace of him. Maria felt a chill. They still exist? Reed didn't answer. He walked to the window, staring out at the pale afternoon light. Some of the same families still sit on the board of trustees. Some of the same names on the doors. Then he turned to her, voice suddenly urgent. Maria! Promise me something. Whatever you do next, be careful. Knowledge can be more dangerous than ignorance. She stood, tucking the papers back into her bag. Thank you, Dr. Reed. He smiled faintly. If you ever find the rest of his work, bring it here. I'll help you finish what he started. As she reached the door, he added softly, And if you hear the walls whisper, listen. Sometimes the dead speak through their equations. Outside, the evening light had turned amber. The oaks whispered in the wind as Maria walked back toward campus. Her steps were slow, her heart heavy but alive with purpose. She glanced once more at the photograph. Monroe's steady gaze seemed to follow her. She whispered, "We'll finish it, Elias. You won't be forgotten again." Far behind her, in the window of Birch Lane, Dr. Paidis Reed stood watching until she vanished from sight. Then he turned back to his desk, pulled out an old ledger, and began to write a single line. If the girl from the library is right, history is about to wake up. The morning after her visit to Dr. Reed, Maria woke with a heaviness in her chest. The old man's words echoed in her head. Knowledge can be more dangerous than ignorance. But it was too late to turn back. The truth had already reached for her, and she had reached back. On her way to the library, she noticed a gray sedan idling by the corner of Nassau Street. It wasn't unusual. Princeton was full of faculty cars, but the way it lingered made her uneasy. When she looked again, she saw the faint outline of a man behind the glass. Gray suit, narrow face, motionless. She tried to dismiss it. Still, when she turned onto Firestone's front steps, the car pulled away. Slow, deliberate. Inside, the air smelled of polished wood and rain-soaked paper. The great reading room was nearly empty, just the rustle of pages and the tick of the tall clock. Maria felt the building's silence close around her like a cloak. She began her shift, moving from aisle to aisle, her cart creaking softly. But halfway through the north wing, she stopped. On the desk near the mathematics section lay a single white envelope. Her name, Maria Alvarez, was written in precise cursive. Her heart pounded. No one at the library knew her full name. She opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper, typed, unsigned. Miss Alvarez, curiosity can cost you your position, or more. Return what you found to the head archivist by Friday night. No copies. No questions. Her hands shook. There was no signature, but at the bottom, faintly embossed into the paper, she saw a small ivory emblem, a triangle enclosed by a ring. She remembered Dr. Reed's words. The Ivory League. That evening, she showed the letter to Thomas in the janitor's room. He read it twice, jaw tightening. "This isn't good," he said quietly. "They know who you are." "I didn't tell anyone," she whispered. "You didn't have to. They watch everything in that building. Cameras, sign-in logs. Someone must have seen you near the restricted wing." Maria folded the letter. "I can't give them the papers, Thomas. If I do, they'll disappear again." Thomas rubbed his temple. "You're brave, kid. But brave gets people buried. I can't stop now." He sighed. "Then at least don't face them alone." That night, the library seemed colder. The fluorescent lights hummed faintly, echoing off the marble floors. Maria felt the weight of every shadow. At 11, she went to the third floor to check her cleaning supplies. When she reached her cart, she froze. The drawer was open. The tin box, gone. Her pulse thundered in her ears. She looked around, scanning the aisles. Nothing. Only the faint smell of cigarette smoke. She ran to the stairwell, but the door was ajar. A trace of gray fabric fluttered near the handle, a thread from a suit jacket. Her breath caught. The man from the car. For a moment, she stood paralyzed. Then she remembered the hidden copies, the ones she'd made secretly each night, writing Monroe's equations by hand in her notebook. If they thought the originals were all she had, they were wrong. She grabbed the notebook from her bag, clutching it like a lifeline. From somewhere below came the sound of a door closing, slow and deliberate. Maria crouched behind a shelf, heart hammering. The echo of footsteps moved through the aisles, unhurried, confident. The rhythm was the same as before. Step, pause, step. Then a voice, smooth and cold. Miss Alvarez. Her breath stopped. "You've been very busy," the voice continued. "Curiosity, as you may know, is a dangerous habit." Maria didn't move. Through the gap between books, she saw the gray suit, the same man from the hallway, tall, with silver hair and sharp eyes. In his hand, he held the tin box. He opened it, inspecting the contents. "Do you know what you've taken?" "These are restricted materials, stolen property of Princeton University." "They're not stolen," Maria whispered, rising slowly. "They were hidden." He turned, regarding her with mild amusement. "Hidden, yes. And for good reason. Elias Monroe was a fraud. You're meddling in things you can't possibly understand." That's what they said about him, too. For a moment, his eyes hardened. "Return the rest of his notes. Forget this ever happened. You'll keep your job. You'll stay safe." "And if I don't?" He smiled thinly. "Then you'll be dismissed. Permanently." Maria stepped back, her hand tightening around her notebook. "You can threaten me, but you can't erase him again." He tilted his head, studying her. "You're very young to be this foolish." Then he placed the tin box on the desk. "We'll be watching." He turned and walked away, his footsteps fading into the echoing corridors. When the door closed, Maria exhaled for the first time in minutes. She opened the tin box. Empty. Every page gone. By dawn, the campus was quiet again. She sat on the library steps, watching the mist lift from the lawns. Her hands trembled as she opened her notebook. Dozens of pages filled with Monroe's symbols stared back at her. P-sex, the endless rhythm of primes. She whispered, "They can take the paper, but not the proof." Then she closed the book and looked toward the rising sun. Somewhere in those equations lay the truth of Monroe's disappearance, and now, perhaps, her own fate. That afternoon, she met Dr. Reed again, breathless, clutching the empty tin. "They found me," she said. He examined the emblem on the letter. "So they still use the old symbol," he murmured. "Ivory within a ring, purity of knowledge, untouched by the unworthy." He spat the words like poison. "They took everything," Maria said. "But I memorized the formulas. I still have them." Reed looked at her with something between fear and awe. "Then, Maria, you carry a fire that's already burned men alive." That night, the gray sedan returned, parked across the street from her dorm. The headlights stayed off, the engine quiet. Maria sat by the window, notebook in her lap, and whispered to the darkness, "You can't scare me. Not anymore." She turned a page and began rewriting the proof by memory, every line a rebellion, every symbol a heartbeat. Outside, unseen eyes watched from behind the windshield. A cigarette ember flared, then went dark. The morning after the gray sedan returned, Maria couldn't sleep. Every creak in the hallway sounded like footsteps. Every car door outside made her heart race. By dawn, she had packed the notebook, wrapped it in a plastic bag, and slipped out the back door of her dormitory. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of wet leaves and diesel from the early buses. She walked quickly toward the train station, her coat pulled tight around her. She wasn't running, not yet, but she knew she couldn't fight the Ivory League from inside Princeton's walls. On the train to New York, she sat near the window, watching the landscape blur past. The marshes of New Jersey, the steel bridges, the faint morning light spilling across the Hudson. She thought of Elias Monroe's quiet face in the photograph, of Dr. Reed's trembling hands, of the gray-suited man's cold promise. There had to be a way to make Monroe's name impossible to erase again. Maria had heard of a science journalist once featured in the Times Sunday supplement, Samuel Kent, known for exposing falsified research at major universities. She found his number in the phone directory at Penn Station and dialed from a payphone. A rough, sleepy voice answered. Samuel Kent. Mr. Kent, my name is Maria Alvarez. I'm calling from Princeton. I have documents, mathematical papers, about a man who was erased from history. A pause. Then the voice grew alert. Erased? Yes. A black mathematician from 1930. His proof was destroyed. I have part of it. Slow down, Kent said. Where are you now? At the station. Don't talk over the phone. Meet me at the Times cafeteria, 10th Avenue entrance. Noon. The newsroom was a living machine. Telephones ringing, typewriters clacking, voices rising in constant motion. Kent met her by the door, tall, bearded, with a coffee-stained tie and eyes that looked both tired and curious. All right, he said, leading her to a quiet corner. Show me. Maria opened the notebook. The pages fluttered like wings, filled with dense symbols and Monroe's notes written in her own careful hand. Kent whistled softly. I don't read math, but this looks serious. You say this man vanished? Yes, his name was Elias Monroe. Princeton erased his work. I found his papers sealed inside a wall. Kent frowned. You realize what you're claiming? If you're right, that's an academic scandal stretching half a century. I'm not claiming, she said quietly. I'm remembering. He studied her for a long moment, then nodded. All right, let me verify a few details. You'll stay in the city tonight. Don't go back to campus until I contact you. That evening, Kent called one of his old contacts, a retired mathematics editor who'd worked with the American Journal of Mathematics in the 1940s. The man listened, then said softly, Elias Monroe? I remember whispers. A genius who crossed the wrong line. The journals were ordered to remove his name. Be careful, Sam. Kent hung up, exhaling slowly. Then he turned to Maria. He existed. The story checks out. Maria felt her eyes sting. Then you'll publish it? I will. But first, we need proof that what you copied is authentic, and that Princeton knew. She opened her bag and took out the ivory-stamped letter. They threatened me. Kent read it, then looked up sharply. You weren't exaggerating. They're still watching. 2 days later, the article went to press. The Lost Mathematician, Elias Monroe and the Proof. Princeton Forgot, by Samuel Kent, staff writer. It described how a janitor at Princeton discovered papers suggesting that a 1930s mathematician may have advanced one of the great unsolved problems in number theory, only to have his name removed from the record. Kent didn't name Maria, but within hours of the article's release, the campus buzzed like a disturbed hive. Professors denied the claim. The university issued a brief statement. No such researcher appears in our archives. But curiosity had already spread. Scholars called the Times demanding to see the evidence, and somewhere inside the administration building, a familiar gray-suited man folded the newspaper slowly, his jaw tight. That night, Maria hid in a cheap motel on the edge of the city. The television flickered with news anchors debating the article. One commentator laughed, calling it a charming ghost story. Another said quietly, Every legend starts somewhere. Maria turned the volume down. On the bedside table lay her notebook. She opened to the first page of Monroe's proof. For the first time, the symbols didn't look like foreign hieroglyphs. They felt alive, pulsing with a rhythm she could almost understand. She whispered to the photograph she kept tucked between the pages. "They know your name now." Near midnight, the motel phone rang. She hesitated, then answered. "Miss Alvarez," a voice said, the same cold tone she remembered. "You've made quite a mess. You should have listened." Her grip tightened. "Who is this?" "You think printing his name changes anything? Truth is not what's written. It's what's believed, and we still decide that." Then a click. Silence. Maria hung up slowly. Outside, a car engine started, then drove away. The next morning, Kent called. "You're on page A3 in every edition. We've got mathematicians from Cambridge to Caltech asking for the papers." Maria smiled weakly. "Maybe now they'll look." "They'll do more than look," Kent said. "They'll dig. But listen, someone broke into our office last night. They didn't steal the notes, but they wanted to. You're not safe." "I was never safe." "Then you'd better stay hidden. I'll handle the next step." That afternoon, Kent received an anonymous envelope at his desk. No return address. Inside was a photocopy of a single page from a 1931 faculty ledger. At the bottom, in faded ink, was the line, "Monroe, terminated. Property sealed by order of H. Wells." Kent stared at it, realizing someone inside Princeton had slipped him the proof he needed. But who? Maria spent the day walking along the Hudson, notebook in hand, her mind filled with numbers and ghosts. The world finally knew the name Elias Monroe. But truth, she realized, was fragile. It needed caretakers. She stopped by the railing, wind in her hair, and whispered, "I'll guard it, even if I have to hide forever." Far behind her, in the shadow of a bridge, a gray car idled again, its headlights off. The headline had run for 3 days before the silence returned. By the 4th, the front pages no longer spoke of Elias Monroe. New stories had replaced him. Politics, markets, wars far away. Yet under that silence, something restless moved. Maria felt it the moment she stepped out of the motel that evening. The sky above Manhattan was low and the air smelled of metal and rain. In her coat pocket, she carried the notebook, the last heartbeat of Monroe's proof. At dusk, she took the train back to Princeton. The decision wasn't reasoned. It was instinct. The story had begun there, among those walls of stone and dust. If the truth was to survive, it had to survive there first. When she arrived, Firestone Library was closed to the public. Its windows glowed faintly, a constellation of lamps against the dark. She walked along the path between elms, each step stirring fallen leaves. The air was damp, charged with the strange stillness that comes before a storm. Through the glass doors, she saw movement. The night staff, the quiet hum of maintenance machines. Everything looked ordinary, but Maria's heart knew better. She found Thomas in the basement corridor, sorting cleaning supplies. His eyes widened when he saw her. "Maria, what are you doing back? They've been asking about you all week." "I have to make sure something doesn't disappear again," she said. He studied her face for a long moment. "Then hurry. They're clearing the old archives tonight. Something about electrical hazards. They've brought men from facilities, not staff, I know." "Clearing?" "More like burning," he whispered. "I saw the disposal bins." Maria felt the floor shift beneath her. "The archives. That's where the wall is." Thomas nodded grimly. They moved quickly through the silent corridors. The smell of ozone and old paper grew thicker as they neared the restricted wing. 2 work lights blazed in the hall, their glow harsh against the stone. Inside the archive room, boxes were stacked beside metal bins, labeled to be destroyed. Maria's breath caught. Some of the boxes bore Monroe's handwriting. Initials faint but unmistakable. E.M. A technician in uniform stood nearby, clipboard in hand. "Orders from administration," he muttered when she asked. "Old materials, duplicates, misfiled documents, all to be incinerated off-site tonight." "Duplicates?" she repeated softly. He shrugged. "That's what they told us." When he turned away, she reached for one of the boxes. The seal broke with a dry crack. Inside were notebooks, brittle and brown with age, lecture drafts, correspondence, and in the corner, a half-erased chalkboard diagram folded into paper, the same equation she had copied. She felt a tremor of both fear and wonder. Thunder rolled outside. Somewhere in the building, the lights flickered. A faint smell of smoke drifted through the vent. Not fire yet, but the tang of overheated wires. Thomas looked up. "Old circuits," he said. "They're overloading the generators with those lamps." Maria's gaze swept the room. "If the power fails, everything here will be blamed on an accident. We need to move what we can." Together they lifted as many notebooks as their arms could carry, placing them into her canvas bag. Her fingers brushed across one fragile page, bearing Monroe's neat signature. The ink had turned sepia, but the words beneath still glowed with life. "To those who read these symbols, remember, mathematics is only another way to say mercy." A sudden pop echoed. One of the lights burst, showering glass. The smell of burning insulation filled the air. The alarms did not sound. Someone had cut them. Thomas coughed. "We have to go." Maria hesitated, eyes drawn to the sealed section of wall where she had once found the tin box. The mortar had been disturbed again, newly patched. She ran her hand across it and felt heat radiating from within. "They're purging the memory," she whispered. "Even the walls." Thomas pulled her back. "Maria!" She stepped away just as another light flickered and died. The corridor dimmed to amber glow. Through the haze, she saw shadows moving, maintenance men carrying boxes toward the loading bay. She recognized the emblem on their crates, a pale ivory triangle within a ring. The Ivory League was not hiding anymore. They slipped out a side door into the cold night. Behind them, the library hummed with distant generators. No flames, only smoke, the slow, clean kind used for sterilizing paper. By morning, the archives would be ash and rumor. At the edge of campus, Maria stopped beneath a lamppost. The bag in her arms was heavy with rescued pages. Thomas looked at her. "You can't keep all of that here. They'll come looking." "I know," she said. "Dr. Reed will know what to do. We'll copy everything. Send it abroad if we have to." He gave a weary smile. "You're fighting an institution, Maria." "I'm not fighting," she said softly. "I'm remembering." They parted before dawn. Maria walked alone past the chapel, where the early bells began to toll. The sky over Princeton glowed faintly orange, not from fire, but from sunrise breaking through the mist. She looked back at the dark shape of Firestone Library and whispered, "You can burn the pages, but not the proof." Then she turned toward Birch Lane, where an old mathematician waited with the last unburned memory of Elias Monroe. By the time Maria reached Birch Lane, dawn had thinned into a pale gold. Mist hung over the oaks, and the small house looked older than before, fragile, as though it too remembered things it wished to forget. She knocked softly. No answer. When she tried the handle, the door opened with a tired sigh. Inside, the air smelled of old tea and smoke. A lamp still burned on the desk, casting its circle of light across a sea of papers. Dr. Nathaniel Reed sat beside it, motionless, eyes lost somewhere far beyond the window. "Dr. Reed?" she said quietly. He turned slowly, and the lines on his face deepened. "You came back." "They tried to destroy everything," Maria whispered, placing the heavy bag on his table. "The archives, the boxes, all gone. I saved what I could." Reed's gaze drifted to the bag, then to her trembling hands. "You shouldn't have risked it. I couldn't let them finish what they started." The old man exhaled. "No, neither could I. Not anymore." He gestured for her to sit. The morning light through the curtains touched his face, tired, worn, almost translucent. "Maria, before you tell me what you found, I need to tell you something. About Elias. About me." For a long moment he said nothing, only watched the steam rise from the untouched cup of tea beside him. Then, softly, "I was there the night they erased him. Not as a bystander, as a witness they needed." Maria's breath caught. "You mean—" He nodded slowly. "They called it a review session. I was the youngest on the committee, a mere assistant. Professor Wells led it. Monroe stood before the board, calm, with his chalk and his truth. But Wells had already decided. He accused Monroe of plagiarism, claimed the work matched an unpublished paper from a German colleague. It didn't, but none of us spoke." Reed's eyes were distant now, glinting with the light of old guilt. "I should have stood up for him. I had checked his logic myself. It was flawless. But Wells was my mentor, my future. He looked at me once, just once, and I stayed silent. That silence cost a man his life." Maria's voice trembled. "You think he—" Reed nodded. 2 days later, his room was empty. The river carried his name farther than we ever did. He leaned back, breathing hard. "For years I told myself I was powerless, that the machine of the university would have crushed me too. But that was cowardice dressed as reason, and every paper I published after that was written on the ghost of his work." Maria's throat burned. "You were part of it." "I was," Reed said. "Not by malice, by fear. The same fear that built the Ivory League. Fear of losing status, comfort, legacy." He reached for one of Monroe's rescued pages, tracing the fading ink with shaking fingers. This was his handwriting. "Look, even in his equations you can see compassion. He wasn't trying to conquer mathematics. He was trying to make it honest." He looked at her with pleading eyes. "You must understand, Maria. I have carried this for 50 years. Every night I heard the chalk strike the board again, the sound of truth being erased. That is why I helped you. Not to atone, and there is no atonement, but because you deserve the truth unfiltered." Maria stood, pacing near the window. Outside, the leaves stirred like restless thoughts. "So all this time," she said, "you kept quiet while they published their histories, their textbooks, their lies." Reed bowed his head. "Yes." "And now you want forgiveness?" He closed his eyes. "No. I want a witness." The simplicity of his answer stopped her. He looked frail, but his voice held the weight of something final. "You see, my time is almost over," he said softly. "But yours is beginning. You've carried the proof in your hands, Maria. Not just the equations, but the courage to read them aloud. That's what they feared most." She opened her bag and spread the saved papers across his desk. The sunlight caught the pages like gold leaf. "Then help me," she said. "Help me piece together what he wrote. Let's finish it, and put his name where it belongs." Reed hesitated, then smiled. a small, trembling smile that seemed to lift years off his face. "Even if we succeed, they will deny it," he said. "They'll say the work is unverified, the sources uncertain." "Let them," Maria whispered. "Truth doesn't ask permission." He chuckled softly, a sound more of sorrow than joy. Monroe used to say something like that. "Mathematics," he said, "is the poetry God uses to count mercy. I thought it sentimental back then. Now I think it was prophecy." They worked through the morning. Maria read each symbol aloud. Reed corrected her gently, explaining what he could. When the lines became too blurred, he drew them fresh with his pen, murmuring equations under his breath like prayers. By noon, the desk was a constellation of papers, each carrying a fragment of Monroe's logic. At the center lay the equation Maria had copied from the wall, the one connecting the zeros of the zeta function with the density of primes. "It's not a full proof," Reed said quietly, "but it's enough to show his path, enough to prove he was there first." "Then we'll publish it," Maria said. "In his name." He smiled sadly. "Do you really think they'll let you?" She looked up, steady. "They can erase a man, not a movement." Reed leaned back, exhausted but peaceful. "Then take them. All of it. When I'm gone, you'll have to keep the memory." Maria hesitated. "You talk like—" He raised a hand gently. "Every mathematician knows when his series is ending." For the first time, she saw his eyes not as weary, but serene, as if finally freed from the loop of guilt that had bound him half a century. "Maria," he said softly, "whatever happens next, forgive them, not because they deserve it, but because the proof you carry will speak louder if it's written without hatred." Her eyes filled. "I don't know if I can." "You will, because you already do." The clock struck noon. Outside, sunlight spilled across the fields, washing the room in warm light. Reed reached across the desk, touched the photograph of Elias Monroe, and whispered, "Welcome home, old friend." Then he turned to Maria. "It's your turn now." She closed the bag of papers slowly, as though sealing a promise. When she stepped outside, the air was bright and sharp, the kind that tastes like new beginnings. Behind her, the house on Birch Lane stood silent, but no longer heavy with ghosts. The morning after Dr. Reed's confession, Princeton looked rinsed clean, as if the campus had washed its face in mist. Oak leaves held bright beads of water. The stone steps before the library glittered. The chapel bells kept patient time like an old clock. Maria carried the canvas bag of rescued pages along the flagstone path to Birch Lane. With each step, she felt she was counting the heartbeats of a name that had just come back to life. Dr. Nathaniel Reed was already seated at his desk, eyes clear with a young man's purpose. He had laid out neat, fresh copies he'd transcribed from the brittle papers. His voice was husky but firm. "I've assembled an arc of the argument," he said. "Not complete, but enough to see the road Elias opened." Maria nodded and added her own careful copies to the middle of the table. They worked in silence. Only the faint scratch of Reed's pencil rose and fell as he underlined turning points in the logic. "We send it today," he said at last, "not only to Kent, to a mathematics editor in Cambridge, an old colleague in Chicago, and a small group studying the zeta function. We won't wait for permission." "And Princeton?" Maria asked. Reed smiled without mirth. "They will have to hear the echo from beyond their walls." By noon, Samuel Kent called, unable to hide his excitement. "We've received 4 more ledger scans from a Princeton insider," he said. "There's a line in faded ink. Monroe, terminated. Material sealed by order of H. Wells. We can publish an excerpt of the proof, but explain it in plain language. I want readers with old hands and tired eyes to grasp why this is a matter of conscience. Then write that it's the story of a heartbeat, Maria said. Prime numbers look like stars appearing farther and farther apart. People think they're random. Elias heard a rhythm underneath, steadier and fairer than most were willing to admit. That afternoon, the paper ran the story across half a page, the headline heavy and clear. The name in the walls, Princeton's missing mathematician, reappears. A black and white photograph showed Elias Monroe at a chalkboard crowded with symbols. In a side box, an excerpt in Maria's hand, a line linking the zeros of Z-es to the density of primes, and a simple gloss. If every non-trivial zero has real part 1 5, the number of primes up to x is predicted precisely by the logarithmic integral li x. Kent explained slowly, tenderly. Primes are the first bricks of arithmetic. The zeta function is the stethoscope pressed against the wall of the integers to hear the heartbeat of those bricks. A retiree in Idaho could follow it. A steel worker in Ohio could nod along. The news moved like wind. That evening, the local station sat 2 professors under warm lights. The first called it an old campus ghost story. The second stared a while at Monroe's picture and said slowly, "When you take a name away, you take a memory with it." On campus, students buzzed. In the math department, certain doors closed softly. In the boardroom, a hurried meeting congealed into a statement. The university would form an independent review committee. On paper, the words independent and review landed like pebbles on a deep pond, ripples on the surface, darkness untroubled below. Near dusk, a note slid under Maria's door. No address, no signature. One careful line. Do not nail the past to the wall. Walls can fall. She held the paper the way one holds a thorn. She set it beside her notebook, drew a breath, and switched on the lamp. On the desk, she laid out 3 essential pages: a segment on the zeta function, a plain note on li x, and a small input-output sketch she had drawn to guide herself. Underneath, she wrote a sentence for her own spine. Mathematics is the language of fairness. 1 + 1 is always 2, no matter who says it. That night, Reed sent the first consolidated packet. He added a preface. This is not a complete proof of the Riemann hypothesis. It is Elias Monroe's 1930 pathway, how he links the silences of Z-es to the cadence of the primes. Colleagues, read slowly for the mathematics. Friends, read with your hearts for the man. He signed small at the bottom. Nathaniel Reed, witness. Then he set down his pen as if laying flowers on a friend's grave. The next morning, Princeton invited the press. The room was polite and amber with light. Behind the dais, the president spoke carefully. We honor truth, listen to evidence, and respect contributions from any source. A reporter lifted a hand. Why does Monroe's name appear in no payroll or collaborator lists? The president paused. Record-keeping of that era was incomplete. Before he lowered his eyes, an elderly woman in the back raised a photo, the ledger page with Monroe. Terminated. Material sealed. The room quivered as if someone had plucked a taut string. A throat cleared. A pen snapped shut. That evening, Kent posted a small follow-up. A ledger speaks. No accusations. Only the image. His last lines moved at a walking pace. Some walls know how to talk. If you place your ear to them, you can hear chalk on slate, paper breathing, and sometimes the soft sound of a name coming home. In the comments, a reader signed Retired Carpenter 78 left a single sentence that made Maria's eyes sting. I don't know the zeta function, but I know when someone hammers a nail into a name, I hope the school pulls the nail. That same night, a small parcel arrived at Kent's desk. A handful of letters between an unnamed student and Elias Monroe, dated 1930. One carried a single steady line from Elias. The time has come for you to stop asking permission to be intelligent. Kent called Maria, his voice gentled. This is no longer the story of a campus, he said. It's the story of how we see one another. Maria sat on the sill and looked over the lawn by East Pine. She remembered Reed's urging, forgive, so the testimony doesn't get bent by bitterness. She wondered what forgiveness meant in a place that had once closed its doors in winter. Not erasing the wrong, she decided, but laying the truth on the table and stepping back so all could see. Anger settled, clarity rose. She would tell it slowly, explain carefully, and throw no stones at names. The pages would speak. 2 days later, the independent committee reached out. A private meeting, off the record. Maria arrived with Reed at a small conference room overlooking a cloistered quad. Across the table sat 3 faces, a young professor, a university attorney, and a historian. The attorney opened with polished courtesies. The historian's questions were precise. Where were the pages found? Why attribute them to Monroe? Who held the key to the room? The young professor took notes in silence, and when he looked up at Maria, she saw no nails in his eyes, only honest curiosity. When it came time for the mathematics, Maria opened her notebook and pointed to her simple diagram. Elias connects 3 plain ideas, she said. First, the zeros of z's mark silences in the harmonic structure of the integers. Second, if all those zeros line up on a single vertical line, the silences are even. Third, when the silences are even, we can count primes with a measuring stick called dx. She traced a vertical line in the air with her hand. The historian's mouth softened. He nodded. Maria closed the notebook. He may not have walked the entire road, but he cut the path. The meeting ended with a promise. We will review fairly. It felt like a seed placed on cold ground, fate undecided. But as she stepped into the cloister, she caught a warmer glint in the young professor's gaze, a late shaft of sunlight. That night, Kent ran a brief notice at the bottom of his page. A group of Princeton students would host a quiet reading of The Pages That Returned in an empty classroom over the weekend. No speeches, no slogans, just reading, slow and clear, like lifting a candle. People began using a name for Maria she never expected, the keeper of the memory of justice. The phrase had come from a letter written by an elderly woman. You do not shout, you keep. Because of keepers, we grow old without losing our memory. Anonymous messages still arrived. Stop while you can. But another letter came signed in a blue, steady hand. I am the grandson of Harrison Wells. I apologize for my family's name, not because of a building, but because of the silence we inherited. I will bring you the key to another storage cabinet. A time and place were written below. Maria slid the letter between Elias's pages the way one slots a final piece into a waiting picture. For the first time in a long time, she exhaled fully. Before dawn, Reed called. He coughed softly, then said, We are beginning to see what Elias hoped for. Not glory, but people willing to hear one another. He paused and added, Whatever the committee decides, we will submit a full dossier to an open journal. Let anyone examine it. They may doubt, they may argue, but they cannot close a door. Maria laughed, a sound light as smoke. Yes, Professor. This time we won't talk to a room with the lock turned. Evening settled in honey over Princeton. On the lawn, small circles of students read newspapers or stared into distance. Maria moved slowly among the old trees, her fingers brushing the grain of the bench where she'd first sat that opening night. She thought of a small town in Texas where her mother still kept her father's photo beside a string of prayers. She pictured a day when this story would leave stone walls and go to small kitchens, to be told in everyday voices. There was once a man forgotten and a young cleaner who remembered. Later, the sky cleared to crystal. Maria opened the window and let in the pine-scented air. On a fresh page, she wrote, in plain letters, Elias Monroe, mathematician, Princeton, 1930. The road he opened, listening to the rhythm inside what looks random, to see that fairness is not a dream. She taped the paper to the wall, not a slogan, but the kind of family photo everyone passes and nods to. Below, the courtyard was nearly empty. A man in gray crossed the bricks, paused, and looked up at her window. No cold smile now, no scent of threat. Only a long, tired glance. Then he moved on. In that small moment, Maria understood something simple. Truth does not win by shouting. It wears stone down like water. It is patient. It walks the long road. She turned off the lamp, rested her forehead to the frame, and offered a thank you to no one in particular, to walls that know how to speak, to hands that open locks, and even to silences that finally agree to breathe. The late bell rang once, like a palm smoothing the day. As the tone faded, Maria closed her notebook, set her palm on the paper pouch, and smiled. "Tomorrow," she whispered, "we open that cabinet." Winter in West Texas does not bite hard, but the mornings wear a thin lace of mist over the dry grass and the tin roof of the village school. In a small, cream-painted classroom, its corners polished by decades of hands and seasons, an old teacher set a cup of tea by the window and opened a worn notebook. On the cover, she wrote 4 simple words, steady and plain. Elias Monroe, Memorandum. 49 years had passed since the night she left Princeton. That was 1985. Today was a late day of 2034. Maria Alvarez's hair had gone white. Her hands were dry with the honest work of the years. Her voice remained low and warm, like the fire of a kitchen stove. Her students were children of farm workers, one in plastic sandals, one barefoot, one wobbly from an empty breakfast. She taught them to count by kernels of corn, to share by cutting a tortilla into equal pieces, and to listen for the small change in a sparrow's song. "In math, we listen first," she would say, "and write only after." During recess, a thin boy in a faded shirt ran back to the doorway, eyes bright. "Ma'am, why do prime numbers not stand in perfect rows?" Maria smiled and drew out a chair. "Because they are like fireflies at night. They look scattered, but if you are patient, you will feel a rhythm beneath them. And once, there was a man who heard that rhythm very clearly." She never said the name at once. She always waited until the last lesson of the day, when the light had slanted over the fields and the wind from the pasture moved through the window, to tell a short story of a black mathematician at a chalkboard, steady in voice, drawing a single upright guideline that scholars call the critical line at 1/2, then linking the quiet places of a deep function to the way we count primes, with something known as the logarithmic integral. She explained it without heavy symbols, only with images that sit well in the mind. If the quiet places line up along one straight track, the counting of the hard-to-find numbers settles into a fairer pattern. That is the heart of his idea. When the class ended and the room took back its hush, Maria pulled an old envelope from a drawer. Inside were a black-and-white photo of Elias, a copy of the 1931 committee minutes, 2 student letters, and a few pages in her own hand from long ago. The originals now lived in open archives, scanned and studied, argued over and taught. Conferences had spoken of the Monroe approach. Essays had traced a history once forgotten. Letters of apology had arrived from a council, from a family, from a gray-suited man who left the campus service before retirement. And the full proof of the famous hypothesis? No one had written the final answer. Yet the lack of a last line no longer disturbed her. She understood at last. Justice is not only a period at the end of a sentence, it is also each comma placed where it belongs along the way. Today she decided to write the road again, from memory, in a voice meant for old readers at night and for the children of tomorrow. No journal required, no committee to wait on, only a text, durable enough not to dry out, warm enough not to burn, as she told herself with a small smile. She opened the notebook. On the first page, she copied a line of Elias that had lived in her heart since she was young. If a day comes when there is no paper left, learn it by heart. Mathematics does not live on the page. It lives in the memory of what is right. Then she began, each line round and clear. She started with fair ground. Prime numbers are the first bricks of arithmetic. Long ago, mathematicians found a very good way to estimate how many primes lie below a large number, using something called the logarithmic integral. But the true count wavers around that estimate. The size and shape of that wavering depend on where the zeros of a deep function fall. Elias stood in 1930 and saw a path. Listen to the silence to understand the counting. With words more than symbols, Maria drew the way he linked the orchestra of quiet in that function, where each zero is like a marked rest, to the steady drum outside that keeps the count of primes. If all those rests lie on one straight staff line, she wrote, then the difference between the estimate and the true count rocks back and forth in a tamer way, balancing itself. She paused for tea and looked through the window. The afternoon had turned to a honeyed yellow, dust motes glimmering like tiny seeds. Her back ached in the way lives of work often do, but her writing hand was firm. She added a section for readers of older age, telling what the logarithmic integral means by way of a basket of corn. She showed why the zeros of a function matter with the image of tuning a guitar. Where a string is tuned to the right tension, the song is clean. Where it slips, the whole tune tilts. Then she gave a few plain sentences about an explicit bridge, a formula that ties prime counting to those zeros, like a rope bridge braided from many strands. Each strand must be placed right for the crossing to hold. She did not prove, in the strict sense of a journal. She told, in the sense of a fireplace. Yet within the telling, the terms appeared in their right places and no more than needed. Non-trivial zeros, the critical line at 1/2, the error term, the balanced swing. They lay like simple salt, not more than the stew requires. Near sunset, the screen phone rang with the narrow glow of a call. It was Arthur Wells, now in his 60s, hair salt and pepper, teaching high school in New Jersey. Behind him hung a small frame that read, "Pull nails out of names." "Mrs. Maria," he said, "next month Princeton will open a small room named for Monroe. Would you come read a passage from your new text?" Maria tilted her head. "I will send the writing. As for me, I would like to read it here first, to the children." Arthur nodded. "You are right," he said. "They are the ones who will tend the fire tomorrow." After the call, Maria opened a drawer and took out an envelope with the shaky hand of Nathaniel Reed on its face. He had gone beyond this world more than a decade ago. She smoothed the last line he ever wrote about Elias. His name now stands on its own feet. She set the letter beside the photo. The gaze in the photo no longer stung her. It rested her. It felt like a relative back from a long road. Night comes early in that land of wind. She lit the small gold lamp and kept writing. The last part of the memorandum was for readers to come. She wrote, "I was angry once. I was afraid. I wanted to shout. Then I learned this. Shouting is straw fire. Slow reading is a coal that keeps. If you want the truth to stay, read it slowly. Let memory do its work." She added a short appendix for rural teachers, small ways to train the ear before the hand. Count corn by tens. Listen to the clock. Tap a spoon against a pot and hear the pattern. Let children hear the beat before they ever see a symbol. At about 8 o'clock, a knock came soft as a moth. The thin boy from the morning stood with a paper sack. "Ma'am, my mother sent tamales. She says they will keep you warm. And, can you tell me more about the man?" Maria took the sack, and the steam of masa warmed the room. She opened a fresh page and let the boy sit close. She told of the quiet reading years ago in a small Princeton classroom, of the custodial worker at the door with wet eyes, nodding to an old man's gentle words. She told of a letter signed, "Retired Carpenter, 78 feet. I do not know the deep function, but I know when someone nails a name to a wall." "Did they pull out the nails, ma'am?" the boy asked. "Yes," she said, "and they are still pulling them one by one. It takes time, but any hand can do it." When the boy had gone, Maria wrote the closing. She did not write the end. She wrote, "This is enough." Then on the back of the last sheet she added a small line. "These pages are copied from memory for the day when someone else's memory tires." The next morning she mailed the draft to Arthur, to an open journal, and to Samuel Kent, who now wrote a weekly column on scientific memory for a local paper. In the message she typed, "No reply required. Please place it where older readers can find it." A week later, the Monroe Room opened. Maria did not travel. She received a photograph instead. A modest space with clear cases, a few handwritten pages, the old camera that had made the first copies, and a wooden plaque with plain letters. Elias Monroe, 1901 to 1931. A road unfinished but straight. Under it, a smaller line, given by those who learned to read slowly. Maria smiled. It was the best way she had seen to say the word public. That same week, a formal letter came from the University Council. The language was careful, as such letters are, but at the end it softened. "We acknowledge our responsibility for the incomplete care and presentation of Elias Monroe's contributions. We know this apology comes late. We also know lateness does not excuse us from the work still to be done." She folded the letter and set it by the photograph. Not triumph, not bitterness, only a calm crease. That evening her class stayed late. A few children drifted to the field to pick plumes of grass. Maria remained alone in the warm hush, sat at the dark wood table, and wrote a dedication in the first printed copy. "To the teachers where wind and sand do their work, where chalkboards wear down faster than chalk, where students come to class not for grades but for a warm lunch, teach them to listen first." As the sun neared the horizon, she stepped onto the porch. The sky lifted like a dome, violet going to deep blue. From far off, a chapel bell spoke once, twice, 3 times, slow and steady. She closed her eyes and heard her life at once. Bus wheels humming on wet roads, footsteps in Princeton corridors, pages turning in Reed's study, the boy asking about fireflies. The sounds blended into a single quiet beat. It did not force. It did not bow. It reminded. Before she went back inside, she opened a small cupboard and took out the paper she had taped to the wall long ago. Elias Monroe, mathematician, Princeton, 1930. The road he opened. Listen for the rhythm inside things that look random. To see that fairness is no dream. She replaced it with a new sheet, same round letters. Rewritten from memory in 2034 Texas. She pressed it flat. Not a slogan. A family photo. That night, Maria slept early. In her sleep, she stood before a chalkboard with a small piece of chalk. Beside her was Elias, younger than in the photo, smiling gently. On the floor, children with sun-browned hair sat cross-legged, eyes wide. She drew one straight guideline and placed a few dots upon it, then turned and said, "If these quiet places line up, the drum in the yard keeps its time." The children nodded. Elias leaned close and said, "Thank you for keeping time." She did not answer. She took his hand and set it on the page where his name now stood up straight. In the morning, pale gold poured into the room. Maria poured tea, set the pot on a folded cloth, and pulled up a chair. In front of her lay the fresh print of her memorandum, thick but not heavy. She rested her palm upon the cover and whispered, "This is enough." A breeze slid across the yard and turned one page. In the margin, a small line she had written the night before showed itself. "The memory of justice." She smiled. It was all she had, and it was all a name needs so that it cannot be erased.